Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea with TPS, informal conversations with achievers in India and abroad. Today, we are very pleased to have Nirada Suresh, essentially an educationist, but also a poet and humanist. I've known her for many years, and the only thing I think about when I see her is poetry. Because when we were introduced to each other long ago in Istanbul, where her husband was a member of my team to the conference on habitat, she and her poetry collection were introduced to me. So somehow I have associated her with poetry. And perhaps there is something about her which is poetic. I don't know, I cannot describe it. So many years later, we decided to start a KIC literary forum. And I couldn't think of anybody else other than Nirada to head it. So it has been very active, but the pandemic intervened, and we have been out of touch with poetry for some time. So I'm so pleased that she has found time to join us today and talk about poetry in general, her philosophy, her life during the pandemic, what has prompted her to write these poems, and all those wonderful things that we'd like to hear. Welcome, Nirada Suresh.
Thank you, Srini, for that wonderful introduction. Happy to be here on your program.
Good. I'm so glad you are here. In fact, we had planned these poetic sessions earlier, and you were supposed to be the first, but then it didn't happen. So now you are the second joining my program on poetry. We want to continue with this, the series of it, and it's a good relief from all the war and struggles and so on that we discuss often in this forum. So it's a good change. So let's hear about your poetic journey. Sorry.
Poetic journey. Oh, chronological years, a long journey.
How did it begin, and where are you standing now, and what are your ambitions, etc.
Yeah, to begin at the start, I should say that I happened to write poetry quite early, pre-teens to be precise, and of course into teenage.
And what triggered it off? What triggered it off? You just suddenly started taking a piece of paper and writing poetry, or was it because of your reading, your love for literature? If all of them can write, why not me? Was that your feeling?
Not exactly. I was surrounded by books, of course, and was quite well read. That's what my teachers said for my age and my class. And then after reading, it just happened that the words just came. It was always there in my head as words, like sprung lines, and I just put pen to paper. That was the beginning. But you know, a gawky,
But there was no purpose as such. You didn't want to change the world. You didn't want to share your intimate thoughts. You didn't want to become another illustrious poet. So it must have been something in your mind when you started.
No, actually, a 12-year-old girl, I don't know how ambitious she can be given the milieu of our times. I was just getting into Kendriya Vidyalayas, and from a convent where there were thousands of children, I narrowed down to a school with about 150 or 200 or odd students, and you were always in focus. There were teachers. You
were also a student in Kendriya Vidyalaya. I thought you were a principal, but you were a student also.
Yes. I started, literally, I was born and brought up in a KV. I started with my schooling in KV. And it so happened that there were teachers, considering the less number of students around, there were all kind of teachers trying to mold you into something bigger than you could be in your shoes, so to say. So I think that was an advantage, coming from a large school onto a small school, and people telling you what to read and telling you to write something, put on paper. That was indeed the beginning, with no ambitions to become published, because I don't think a 12-year-old ever thinks in terms of publishing something. So then slow progression on to writing in class for class, and nursing dreams of publishing in perhaps a school magazine at best, nothing beyond that.
Education-wise, did you do English literature?
Yes, I did. Those were the days when you had to opt for electives right from class 9 and you go through a 9, 10, 11-year, 3-year pattern. So promptly I took English literature, thinking that, okay, I might be able to do well in that. And that really proved to be the most encouraging thing that happened to me. Doing literature at such a young age and getting an opportunity to read a lot. And then, of course, leaving school, coming on to college, you wanted the journey, my journey.
What do you
Coming
remember
on,
about those days? The Golden Treasury? What was your favorite collection?
the Golden Treasury, I was reading books beyond my age. For example, I was reading, of course, Hardy and Dickens. You begin, those are the kind of books that school libraries have. Complete works of Dickens, complete works of Thomas Hardy and the Bronte sisters. So I was literally fed on those. And
How
they
about
flouted
Shakespeare?
all.
Shakespeare.
Yes, besides Shakespeare, we did that as part of our curriculum, Shakespeare, right from class 9. So it was like, being a precocious child right from that age and reading and nourishing yourself with the thoughts of the world. And then something wonderful happened in the sense that both my parents were professors at the university. So they had what you call these library cards. Each of them had 6 cards each. They would write me authority letter, and I would go with a bag to the library and collect 12 books at a time to be kept over the month and read. So I think in a way, I started young to read.
So good. So that means you had a literature background even
Exactly.
before you became a poet. So that is not nothing surprising that. Because you did not focus on Run and Martin. You rather focused on Shakespeare. That makes a big difference when you are writing.
Yes, and the novels.
But what is the best definition of poetry you have heard?
Uh, I haven't arrived at any one single, magical quotation on that. I am with a lot of the romantics, the
So who do
writers.
you identify with? Do you identify with the Victorians, the Romantics, the modern poets? If you were to
I think
classify yourself,
more with the romantics, of course, who can be away from the clutches of Keats, Shelley, Byron. No one can escape them at that age. So I was literally with them, slowly transitioning on to Matthew Arnold, Eliot, and the others, Robert Frost, those who came in with a little different, philosophy on poetry other than spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings.
or
So you
emotions
have to go.
recorded in tranquility?
That's right. So
Okay.
I shifted, I was fickle. I shifted from them on to Eliot for a while. And then, of course, Philip Larkins and the others who came saying that, poetry means it is, you must have an ear and, and an eye and it must go to your heart. So I thought it made a lot more sense that way. So I was constantly involved in
That's
changing.
what I was going to ask. If you are saying that you are more like romantic poetry, I see a lot of satire in you, a lot of humor, a lot of irony, a lot of view of the vision of the world, etc. You don't find them in the romantics. So obviously, you may have started off a romantic poet, but you are very much a modern poet as far as I can see, and that is true about most writers today. Nobody
I guess
sticks to the old patterns.
you got to evolve, and you have me here now in front of you as you call it, womanoid 3.0 version. I have changed over the years. That's it.
That is true. So that means you are evolved with your poetry. You are not remained. But that's true of all artists. Everybody has a
Yes,
particular stage. When you write romantic poetry, then you write something
exactly.
more serious. Then you want to reform the world. So all these phases you go through. And having seen some of your poems, I know that evolution has taken place. Because from what I saw, your first collection, that was called, the one that you gave me was Bonsai, was it? Or was it
That's
another?
right.
The first
That's
one.
right.
That was your first
That's
collection. I remember
that's
that.
it.
The white cover and a drawing on the cover.
With Jatin Das putting in the cover.
Yeah, right. So I think I told you that I liked a poem there about the husband coming back from 5-star hotels with shampoo and conditioner. So you remember that? What
Sorry.
was That was that autobiographical? Was Suresh doing that?
Yeah, see, something, let me make one truth about poets here. It need not always be grounded in your own personal experience. You listen to people, then you be in their shoes or you get under their skin and, transfer those experience onto your experience, and you can write very much in the first person itself, as if you are experiencing it. That's
But
something about...
the danger is, as I was telling somebody the other day, Madhavi wrote several things, and people believe she did those things and believe that she was that. But later we discovered it's not so. Much of it was imagination. So there is that
Yes,
danger of absorbing other people's experiences and putting into your poem in
yes.
first person. So they may think, yes, she has had that experience. That's a danger in autobiographical writing. And
Well,
also,
as a poet, you are willing to risk it. When people attribute every experience to be your personal experience, you run that risk. But that's okay, I guess. It goes along with this. But in truth, you can always transfer other people's experience onto yours, juxtapose it, and write good poetry as you really live through those moments.
yes, the poetic license that we talk about, don't we?
Of course, not to mention the poetic license.
Yeah, exactly like that. But then, of all the poets and others you have read so far, can you identify one person who has influenced you most? One
Of
poet,
course, to begin, among poets,
or anyone? I mean, anyone in literature
see,
whose writing has influenced you most?
in literature, I guess, as I told you before, almost all the romantics.
Or
Then
if you say,
Eliot
who
was
is
a
your, suppose you are asked, who is your favorite poet? Which we normally ask civil service candidates. So imagine yourself to be a civil service candidate and tell me who is your favorite poet, because the next question will be why.
for a time, of course, I thought I could vibe with Keats, to fall upon the midnight with seize upon the midnight with no pain, etc., etc. I thought those really influenced you a lot. Then came, of course, I discovered Indian writers too, and Kamala Das, and I thought that was a great discovery, that to be reading Indian writers at the same time.
Right, but Keats's imagery is a little bit alien to you as an Indian, aren't they? His
Um,
images are Western, European, American. Don't you feel that way?
the passion, I think the passion that is cutting across cultures, cutting across countries, the passion that he felt.
No, that is true of all literature. But Shakespeare, for example, if
Yes.
we start reading, you may wonder how you can enjoy this play without knowing Greek mythology. Don't you get that feeling? And then you slowly
But
start learning Greek mythology and whatever he takes, and then you enjoy it more. So, like that in kids, I had found so many images which were not familiar to me when I was in college. So then it is very difficult for you to identify with him as your favorite poet, which he was not. But at the same
uh,
time, I was associated or related to certain concepts which had thoughts about Indian philosophy. There are many English poets. T.S. Eliot is one of them, who refers to the Vedas and the Upanishads and so on. So when did you mature into someone who can appreciate literature of various kinds within the English family?
that, of course, I think it started with doing your when doing your graduation and your post graduation, because the syllabus requires you to delve deeper into different kinds and different genre of literature, and that is when I think, as a writer, I matured, looking beyond the romantics, um, into the intellectual aspects of writing poetry, decoding life, interpreting life, and the nuances in writing. And of course, with we had American literature for the our masters, and that was when I went into Steinbeck and Dickinson, and all those William Carlos Williams and all those writers. So there was no end. I was trying to bring to the dregs the cup of poetry, especially poetry in particular. It was a wealth
Were you
of poetry.
criticized? Were you criticized for imitating that? Even a poet like Dr. Panikkar, when he wrote, Kurukshetra, people said this is copy of T.S. Eliot. Then they criticized him. In fact, Krishna Warrior sent it back, saying that this is not poetry.
I see. Okay. So far, some of the confessional poetry was treated as gender specific, that say all women write this kind of poetry. But nearer home, say maybe in 30s and 40s, people said some of my poems had a Kamlada streak, which I felt
You didn't mind
that.
that. You didn't think it was a criticism. You accepted it as a fact.
No, I thought that was my way of looking at, relationships, especially man-woman relationships, interpersonal relationships, the relationships, as you see, reflected in this society. So that was not, the prerogative of a few writers. Any writer could reflect on that and write. So I never did mind. But people felt that they were intensely personal, and they had a kind of universal relationship to women all over the world. So when you write, you don't write consciously thinking that this reflects the plight of the Asian women or the American women. You write about women's predicament in society. So that was the only accusation ever made. There was no pilferage or any other theft made or sourced about anybody else.
But would you then
So I think
will you then characterize yourself as a woman poet? Some people find it a criticism. No, I'm not a woman poet, I'm a poet. So you don't mind that
yes.
criticism.
No, I didn't mind the criticism about some of the experiences that would be shared by the women the world over. That was fine. But gender doesn't come into writing. I think if you were to erase the names of writers and present it to a group, like an experiment, can you say whether it is a woman poet or nobody says man poet for that matter? I don't think it will matter much unless you take on the persona of a man. While there are many poems which I have written as if I were a man. So I think it is difficult to tell if you remove the name from the poem and try to try to decode whether it is woman's writing or a male writing. It would be
But the
difficult.
reality in life that women suffer more than men. As a man, I can tell you that. Because the challenges of women are much more. The society does not accept them to the extent they can. On the other hand, I believe that women have an advantage because men are always happy to accept women's capabilities and so on. There is a big debate, huge debate going on. Many women feel that they don't get the recognition that they deserve. Well, I feel that they start with the recognition. If a woman walks into your room, you respond differently from a man walks into your room. So you have an advantage already. That's my view. But many people don't think that. They think that they get discriminated. Anyway, you may have a view, but you do not consider yourself to be a spokesperson of women. You don't, do you?
Not always. I think I came out through that phase. I'm still able to share similar experiences where women can relate better. But I feel if you mature as a writer, you come beyond that label. Because
Right.
you write about not just women's aspect, you write about whatever you find around in society.
But when you started, did you start trying out the rhyme and rhythm and rules of poetry? And did you start with that or you started with free verse straight away?
Yes, that's one thing. Right from the start, I wasn't stuck on meter and rhyme, but there was an internal rhythm in my head. When I wrote
You
the
look for the
cadence or the
words
music,
writing each other. Padmanabhan Nair P. to America went he. There's a joke about How you write? Instead of you say,
No, no,
when I went to America, you put it like this and then it becomes poetry. And such wrong thinking is there. You didn't go through that process.
no, I didn't. Sometimes inadvertently rhyme schemes came. I mean, without deliberately going after a rhyme. As I told you, the lines came in proper form, with a proper cadence, and with what shall I say, with a pattern in their own, on their own. And so I didn't find writing all that difficult or labored or strained. I didn't have to figure out or look in for similar words or, a better word. It just came. I don't know if you ask me how you do it.
No,
It's
no,
something
that is for the reader, writer and the reader. That's a different relationship. But please compare yourself with a modern art. You throw some paint on the wall and say this is agony. You call it, and then it is accepted. And the same person may be able to do a portrait. So consciously he moves from portrait to this because the portrait doesn't give him the kind of expression that he wants to do. And so many poets, even Shakespeare, even though he was the master of free verse, he has written, meter, rhyming poetry as songs, etc., in plays to show that he is not incapable of that. Many poets do that, but some of them actually start with meter and rhyme, etc., and then deliberately go on to the free verse. So both can happen. But even people who are very knowledgeable, very famous as modern painters, do conventional painting to demonstrate, as it were, they can do it. It's not because they don't do it. That's why they're throwing paints at the canvas. So have you felt like that? Sometimes you must sit down and write a poem with rhyme and meter and show the world that you are capable of it.
No, well, frankly speaking, I haven't felt the urge. The themes of my poems rather dictated the kind of language that should come into the poetry. That was the way.
Good. Tell us about
I
your
did
themes. What are the main themes
themes.
that you've dealt with? Yeah.
Okay. My
I know
themes,
some of
most
them,
of
but
my
for the
themes.
sake of our viewers.
All right. Most of my themes relate to people in relationship to people, interpersonal relationships, family relationships, man woman relationships. That's what I'm most comfortable in writing.
About
Going
nature.
beneath the
About
skin.
nature. Nature.
Nature. Some of the poems, of course, are nature poems, but I never write about political poems per se. But I'm comfortable with human beings, their equations, what they think and what they tell, the mismatch between what they are inside and what they are really outside. Those are the kind of things that I kind of, revel in.
Can you give us an instance of a poem of yours and then trace how it occurred to you? This particular poem, how did it start? So that one gets an impression as to how the poet in you was born in that sense. For example, you
Okay, okay.
saw an image or you read a story and then it prompted you to write that poem. So, can you tell us that instance and the poem and relate them to each other?
Oh, okay, okay. It's a tall order, but I will certainly try
Just pick any
and
poem and remember if you can remember the origin of it. That'd be very interesting.
most of them I should be able to remember. I think I will read to you from my first volume,
Right.
a poem called The Genie. Okay, this I remember vaguely that I wrote this sometime in Delhi. I had my family with me, and I had both my children. So it relates to the experiences that I was going through. It's a woman centric poem. Shall I read this? So
Yeah, sure.
here I go. The Jinn. The women in TV ads approximate an ideal to the Indian male of a beguiling, decked drawing room seductress with a life's mission of turning out toast, 2-minute noodles, instant smiles, wiles, whetting voyeuristic appetites, floating fantasy females. The real woman, the toiling mother of two, with chipped nails, sagging breasts, and streaked hair, relegated to the kitchen to cook proper Deshi meals, is neither seen nor heard. Either way, she hovers as a jinn at the fringes of his domain to materialize at meal and bedtime, to titillate his palate and crotch. So, well.
So what prompted you to write it immediately? Of course, this has got several experiences, several emotions, several images. But when you started writing, was there a particular occasion or a particular experience you had in mind? That's what I was trying to relate to.
So, I see, I was working at the time, and while you're in your English department, you share experience with others, the pressure under which you work, the pressure of looking after kids, your family, your school life. You have to excel at everything. And unlike other schools, Kendriya Vidyalayas are very, very demanding. So there was always a kind of shared experience going on, the troubles and travails of women discussed in a staff room.
So, no, but this poem could apply to anyone. It doesn't have to be you.
This is something.
This is any housewife will have this kind of.
Yes, anyone who read it said, "Oh, you have voiced exactly what we feel. Right. This is it." So I realized that that was the taking point: the pressure in which a woman survives, expected to do everything.
That's how a poem becomes important, from the personal to the universal. Anyone who reads it might should feel that this is what I felt. This is not just Nirada's emotion. So that is what, when it becomes universal, it becomes a poem. Otherwise, it is just a story or a thought. So that is what I was trying to driving at. So there must be many things like that which triggered a poem, a dream or an experience or frustration or happiness, etc., etc. So that's quite understandable.
That's one of the earlier poems.
Are you familiar with Malayalam poetry?
Well, see, the dilemma of doing an education in a Kendriya Vidyalaya is that your mother tongue is never taught as a subject. I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm not getting into that debate.
You don't use it also. You don't use it in your conversations.
That's right. So, and also the schooling before the Kendriya Vidyalayas came in was in a convent. There you are expected to do Hindi and French. And then you are transplanted to a KV where you move on to Sanskrit, with the result that I'm certain in my class 1 or before that, I must have been taught the alphabets. Otherwise, I couldn't have been able to read it. So I can read, but the modern script I find difficult to, modern Malayalam script. But otherwise, I can read pretty fast. But writing is where I'm handicapped.
But then, do you think it was a handicap for you?
When I couldn't write, because somehow at the back of my mind, it always came to me, maybe if I could write in Malayalam, that would have been another choice open to me, being a bilingual writer. Reading is fine, but somehow I was convinced I could have evolved a style of my own for that time, and being quite a sensational writer. I would have had more readership. So,
in other words, you will support the present education policy, which is evolving still, that at least for the first 5 years, children must learn everything in the mother tongue. Do you support that?
Certainly, I support that. So the child can express in bilingual writing.
Because Malayalam literature is so rich that the rest of the world is missing something by not reading Malayalam. And sincerely feel that, if you have not read Shankarakurup or Kumaranashan or Vallathodu, how could you understand the world? And that is denied to millions of people on earth. But they have their own. They have their own literature, they have their own traditions. Probably it is made up. But for an average Malayali, the stories and the experiences in great poets in Malayalam, missing it out is a certain loss in their lives. But of course, you are entering.
But I remember reading. I remember reading a lot of stories in translation of Hindi writers, as well as M.T. Vasudevan Nayar's stories. A couple
But you
of
could
short
not
stories.
read them in Malayalam at all.
I could read them, but I can't write much. But I could read them, but then the script changed, and then I found it even more difficult to read with that kind of flow. But I can read. I can still read at a very good speed Malayalam literature.
Well, today we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Mathrubhumi. You notice that? Did Mathrubhumi influence you in any way? Were you able to? Because that was
the Mathrubhumi weeklies influenced me. I was not much of a newspaper reader at that age while in school, but the weeklies, they had stories which were unusual.
Mathrubhumi weekly set the tone of literary appreciation those days. There was really nothing.
Yes, certainly. And, yes, I did read all the stories.
There was editor when I started understanding Mathrubhumi. And that, fortunately, he is still alive. So we know the evolution. He'll probably write differently now. But I think learning and having been able to write Malayalam is an asset. And that brings me to the phenomenon in Kerala that some of the best writers in Malayalam are English teachers. Ayyappa Panikar, for example, Oinukuru was a Malayalam teacher. But Hriday Kumari, I don't know whether she ever taught Malayalam. Hriday Kumari never taught. So Madhavi Kuti was very fluent in English literature and so on. So that is an advantage that they have. And they are able to appeal to both the Kerala audiences and others, because Kerala audience is limited. And you mentioned translations. Have you ever tried any translations? Like your own into English?
I did a very brave thing. I translated M.T. Vasudevan Nayar's Vanaprastham into English and got it in Indian literature in Sahitya Academy. And it was a very hard job because the Malayalam that I know and the language that he writes, a very chaste Malayalam, localized to that area, it was very difficult. But I did it. And later on, when I met him, he told me that at one point I had made a mistake and I was horrified. I told him, I'm really sorry and I will not attempt any more such, fiascos. Then he said, no, you can translate any of my works. Go ahead. I'm just telling you, because I wrote, I know that was not what I intended. That's the only mistake that you did. Otherwise, it was perfect. I had done that. Then I also translated Mukundan's Unnikatha along with another professor of Malayalam. I don't know if he was Malayalam professor. We both together attempted for the British Council Translation Award. And believe me, I was so surprised when we got the prize of the translation that year. That made me feel that, certainly if I had gone through a course in Malayalam, I would have been better for it.
No, but that one dimension I did not know. I did not know that you had translated Malayalam into English. You know the famous story about Narayana Menon, who translated Chemmeen. And at one point, Parikutti calls his, his beloved Tanga Kudam, and he translated it as pot of gold. That is like translating Karale into liver, my liver, So such glorious mistakes have been made. And Narayana got away with pot of gold. Now people will translate it as that, but it should have been translated as darling, not pot of gold.
No, but MT gave me an assurance that I could take any of his works and translate.
But
should I choose to?
You didn't take up the challenge.
No, after that I was very diffident, Unless backed by another Malayalam expert, I am not willing to undertake translations. The English part I can, but as you said, the literal flavor of it, I may miss that.
And the reverse you can never try, from Malayalam to English. Sorry, English to Malayalam.
No. I thought I could, but in English the words came. In Malayalam, the words aren't coming.
What you should do is what Tagore did. If Tagore had not translated Gitanjali to English, he would not have won the Nobel Prize. isn't it? Because it is he who translated it. So suppose you were able to translate one of your poems into Malayalam in good Malayalam and good poem, that will be a feather in your cap. Anyway,
that's very encouraging, but I don't think I'll do that.
Yeah. No, because I always think that Malayalam literature is not getting the kind of recognition it deserves because enough has not been translated. Enough Malayalam has not been translated.
Yes.
Some have been done. But if we were able to translate all the works of classics in Malayalam to English, we would have definitely won a Nobel Prize at some stage. And Panikar sir, I did a lot of translations for that purpose. Sachidanandan Das. So that is a lacuna in our story of Malayalam literature.
Now that you tell me this, I was recently thinking after I did translate MT, I was thinking I happened to read the Palace Trilogy of Naguib Mahfouz, the only Arab writer in Egypt to get the Nobel. And I was convinced that if someone could translate effectively MT's stories, MT's work into English, certainly I would say that he would have easily taken the cake. He would have won a Nobel.
I've been saying this for a long time. Whenever I talk about literature, I always say there should be. Dr. Panikar tried a lot. He did a lot of translations. Now, Sachidanandan Das. People do not think that it's below their dignity to translate somebody else's work. And that would be very...
talking about Sachidanandan, I think he had a great role in bringing me to publish. Oh. While I was at, can I say that now about
sure. Tell us.
Yeah, I had not come out and published any. I kept writing. And one time in Delhi, I met a professor, Professor Redhi Menon, who is also a critic. She was excited reading that. She said that I want to show these to Professor Sachidanandan, and he gave me lavish praises and wrote a very lengthy preface for my first collection of poems and gave me the courage. And he told me, you are very much in the mainstream of women writers. You should keep writing. I think that was the pot of gold that I got at that point in time when I was really going through stressful times, career-wise, family-wise. And I clung on to his words and I have continued.
So but you must be happy about that because he is not known to be very generous.
That's what people say. That and I realize now I had been unusually privileged and lucky to get that kind of a long preface from him, placing me along with the mainstream writers. I don't think many people in Delhi took to it kindly, the way he lavished his praises on my writing. All these, I wasn't conscious then. Much later, I was conscious of how privileged I had been to be kind of,
I'll agree there. You must consider yourself, deserving of that. And that is very, very, very important. And how about your poetic life in Trivandrum? You have been in Trivandrum for some years. What kind of atmosphere in Trivandrum which enables you to engage in poetic exercises?
You want me to be candid on that?
Yeah, sure.
Can I be candid? Be candid on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel I have skipped back a few decades coming back to Trivandrum, where attitude to women are concerned. But I don't want to tread the same path again, projecting the plight of women. I have come through that.
No, I'm talking purely about poetry now, in terms of encouraging.
I'm telling about poetry. So I don't want to write those kind of poetry where women are not treated well, as I still find, though I left the place for more than 30 years, wandering around many cities, when I come back, I don't find any great attitudinal change in the general public. But I don't want to tread the same path, writing about the travails of being a woman writer or a woman. I am done with that. I would rather move on to other kind of experiences with which I can relate to everybody. I'm putting that behind.
Speaking more in the sense of the various groups we have. Poetry Chain, Gopi Kotur runs it. It was started by Papanikar. Well, you have now KIC Literary Forum. There are several others.
These are poetry scene. You're talking about the poetry scene.
How does it work? It encourages you. It prompts you to do more. and it is helpful for you to understand your own deficiencies and your own merits, etc. How does it work?
Certainly, getting
Or
an
is it just
opportunity.
an ego drive? People come and read and happily go home.
No, that you cannot ignore the ego drive part of it. But by and large, compared to 30 years ago, I'm excited that there are a couple of poetry platforms for young writers and seasoned writers to come and read. That is a big thing, which I couldn't dream of 30 years ago or 40 years ago. So that's a kind of more open poetry life that you have around. But as for, of course, when you hear good poetry, you know it is good poetry.
No, but
So,
as chairperson of the LKIC Literary Forum, what are your main objectives? Is it that you read your poem and understand, or is it
no,
your
no way.
interest in getting young people to write, give them a
Exactly,
forum,
exactly.
and
Yes.
but also at
In
the same
fact,
time you want good poets to come there. So how do you manipulate all this?
certainly, as I see it, KIC has broken into the literary field with a bang, and the credit goes to you, your name, your way of conducting, no two opinion of it. And people want to come and read at your venue because they know there is a learned audience there is a discerning audience there, and what reactions they express about the poems have their weight in gold, because these are seasoned men who have traveled the world and been on top career diplomats. So there is a kind of scramble to read poetry at KIC, number one. And they also find that there is no over criticism, no condemning. Everyone gets a praise, everyone has a place. I think that's ideal for poets to come out with.
So that means you are comparing. I have not been to other poetry groups, so you are comparing your own experience with other groups, and you feel that
Certainly.
KIC
Certainly, I have read
brings
poetry.
value. What is the
Yes,
value that KIC adds to these groups? That's what.
yes, exactly. I will tell you. I've read poetry Delhi all over. Then I have read poetry Bombay. I have read poetry here, and poetry in a couple of other countries.
Different
Normally,
groups and different groups in Kerala itself.
different groups, not much other than poetry chain and of course KIC. There aren't any other regular groups where you read once a month or twice a month. There aren't.
Oh, there might be quite a few. There might be quite a few which we may not be
There
aware of.
might be, but I am not aware of them. But right now, I can say KIC rides the crest with the kind of audience that come and the kind of encouragement that youngsters get. So many youngsters come to read. The youngest we had to read was a 7-year-old girl who came and read her poetry with voice. So this is a big thing happening for poetry.
And I believe her poems are being collected in an anthology.
That's right.
You're talking about Kunjikrishna's granddaughter, right?
Great, exactly. So
I believe an anthology is coming. That'll be a great privilege for us.
she read first on KIC.
So I'm sure she will recall that. No, such things are what we should be doing, because poets can read themselves and criticize others, etc. But bringing more people into it, make them feel comfortable. So there may be many good writers who are hiding behind some kind of a wall. Oh, am I good enough? So that is the kind of service probably KIC can.
But the people writing in secret, they will all crawl out of the woodwork and they have to come in the open. If you are writing serious poetry, you want to be heard. You will certainly come out. That's what I feel. How long will you hide?
That reminds me, we lost 3 years recently. 3 years we just did not do anything because of the pandemic. How was it for you? What was your pandemic experience? Did it make you more creative, less creative, more despondent with life? There is a whole lot of pandemic literature coming out. Half of them are near lamentations. Half of them are about what they have lost. But there are many who talk about the ability of mankind to rise above these problems and be very, very creative, do things and try to find out the secrets of nature and viruses and so on. Because all of it is not over. There will be tons and tons of pandemic literature. Did you try any of them? I think you did one poem I saw. Maybe you could read that to give us that experience.
Pandemic poems I had read on your platform before, some online poetry. So I did away with that to read now.
You don't remember that?
But my experience, I can say, it left me looking.
The poem called Ameya is not on the pandemic?
Yes, it is a pandemic poem, but I'm not sure if I have it here. It's a pandemic. Definitely, it's a pandemic. You want
That's
me to
what I
read
was
that?
thinking about because I read that.
Uh-huh.
So, but have you written more?
Yes, I had written quite a few, but everything wasn't necessarily pandemic poem. But a few of them.
No, I'm not talking about the theme. The experience, how it has transformed you in any way. Has it, like for example, people have become more conscious of mortality. Definitely it happened in my case because they were kind of drawing a line of 65. So as though above 65, you have no chance or you don't deserve to live. And that kind of a feeling crept in the initial stages, you remember? And, it was not intimations of immortality, but intimations of mortality.
Reality.
Did that happen to you? Probably you're not 65 yet.
Not really. I think writers toy with the idea of mortality and immortality often. That's one thing for sure. You toy with it. You are always thinking about the mortality aspect. So it's nothing new and it's not pandemic specific, the idea of mortality. The idea of isolation and not being able to go out, that did not worry me in the beginning because I thought that that was a good thing to hone your reading skills and to look inward and write more poetry. You are getting physical time and space to write more poetry. So it didn't worry me the first year at all. What worried me was the time for household chores was going double and treble, with the result that it was eating into the writing and reading time.
You had a husband to feed. Those no children. Children
Not
are
exactly. You can, when you're writing, no children here. When you're writing, you can go without a meal at regular intervals. You can live on poetry and fresh air, as it were, for some time. But if you
No, I find that when 8 o'clock the dinner bell rings, I'm in the middle of something very important. But your wife does not understand that. She doesn't want the food to grow cold. So I kept telling her about Shah Rukh Khan, the sleeping habits. Shah Rukh Khan has said he sleeps when he feels like, he wakes up when he feels like, he goes out when he feels like. That should be a happy life, don't you think?
I think so. That is the recipe for happiness, according to me. So eating when you feel like and not sticking to 4 meals would be the secret.
Like that. So the pandemic may not have helped you in that.
No, but I bifurcated into gardening heavily. That took a lot of time, which gardening was always a passion with me besides poetry.
But if I know Suresh, he is a very systematic person. He is very diligent. He is very ambitious about his profession, etc. So he is somewhat different from you in that sense. He is not sensational. He is not too sensitive. Is that so? Or are you more? Is that
yeah, because what I like is that he has never asked me the basis of my writing, the people I write about, the experiences that I relate as first person.
He has never told you what will the other people think.
No. Never. Oh, that's something that I am really, really lucky about. When you compare experiences with other writers, what you write is not looked at critically or as the personal, even if it were a personal experience. I think he's way, way beyond all that. And he respects me, and I know secretly that he admires me, besides other things, for my writing, which is very, very valuable for me as a person and as a woman.
Very good. I know. I have noticed that and I have appreciated it. But often creative activity means a lot of freedom and lack of a very rigid routine.
Exactly.
You address that. So we are now come to the final question. Why do you write poetry?
Why do I write?
Somebody asked the cow, why do you give milk?
It's in the cow's nature, you mean? So it's my nature. Okay.
Exactly. That is the answer I was looking for. Okay. I cannot help writing. You know Panikasar's famous poem. about the yellow flowers. Kanikonna.
Kanikonna, okay. Cassia.
Since I am a Kanikonna, I have to bloom. It's not because I am trying to bloom. വിരിക്കാതിരിക്കാൻ എനിക്കാവതല്ലേന്നല്ലേ അദ്ദേഹം പറയും. So,
It's very beautiful.
Is that true of you?
Yeah, if you don't think me very pretentious, let me tell you something that I read. Someone asked Mallory, the mountain climber, why do you climb mountains? Why do you want to climb Everest? He just said, because it is there.
Right.
So, if I don't sound pretentious, because it is there in me, the poetry is there in my head and my heart, and it is clamoring to come out.
So it has to come. That is the general answer that you get from all poets.
Okay.
And because it is not something that you generate, but it's something that is generated in you, and it has to find expression. Because if the cow doesn't give milk, then it's painful for it, right? And that would be true of human beings too. So when you are full of something, you have to express it, and that is probably. But on the hand, there are people who invent reasons, construct, a structure, and then try to fill it in as a conscious effort. So both these you see in poetry. And some people will are accused of that you are not, this is not natural, you are building it up consciously. But you certainly belong to the first category where you are compelled to write.
Compelled and impelled and propelled, whatever you want. You are made to write. Excellent. And you feel good after that.
Very good. Now we are just for a few more minutes. Can you read one of your favorite poems?
All are my favorite poems. But
we have 5 minutes, so.
Sorry, I will read a poem about a child, the child.
All right.
I'm not touching on relationships this time, which I often read, which I've read with you too. So I'm choosing something else. The child. You might have thought 5-year-olds chased dragonflies, broken wavered kites, or drooled over cookies. You might have thought 5-year-olds chased dragonflies, broken wavered kites, or drooled over cookies. But this one I met at the trade fair was someone apart. He tottered not after a dancing top or a racing ball, but balancing on his baby head the weight of a standard brick to go into a structure there. He tottered not after a dancing top or a racing ball, but balancing on his baby head the weight of a standard brick to go into a structure there. Taking in his tom-thumb stride his parental livelihood of unbonded labor, the Vamana feet measured out his babyhood and boyhood to giant step into adulthood. The name of this game? That's a question. What's the name of this game?
Very good. Very good. Has it been, somebody has commented on it? Has it been published?
Yes, it's been published, and I understand it's included in some textbooks. Most of my poems about children find a way in the materials of students.
In the CBSE textbook.
CBSE textbooks, the boards of UP and Bihar, and especially the creative writing course of CBSE has my poems in it.
Okay. How about publishing? How much has it been difficult for you to get your poems known to other people?
I think, as I told you,
publishing poetry is more difficult than writing, publishing a novel. Publishers are not too enthusiastic because not many people buy anthologies. So, what has been your experience?
I want to quote you 2 lines of Auden Nash with regard to publishing. Okay? Poets aren't very useful because they aren't consumeful or very produceful. You know how he plays with words.
Right.
So this is the true picture of a poet. But with me, I didn't find it very difficult with my first collection. Of course, second collection had the advantage of the preface written by Professor Sachidanandan. DC Books brought me. Now I have poems for 2 books, and I am trying to get to negotiate with DC. If not, I may have to look elsewhere. It's not very lucrative publishing poems.
Good. Nobody makes money on
No,
on books.
nobody can. You are lucky if you sell 1,000 copies.
Unless
Otherwise,
you have President Clinton who gets a $50 million advance for your biography.
biography. I'm talking
Otherwise,
about poetry. I don't know if
no,
my
I'm
biography.
saying, if you have something like that, somebody like that, and I think was it Padmanabhan who said when he wrote his first short story, he got 25 rupees, and now he gets 25,000 rupees. But that does not made him write more. In fact, it has made him write less because he has to write something which is 25,000 rupees worth. He was saying that.
That's true. That brings me to the question of craft. If your poetry lacks craft, it will have nothing to say. The craft is kind of embedded in your poetry. It's not something apart from the poem. The piece, it's a package. It has to come together when you write. It's not that you finish the poem and then add on embellishments. No way. It's a simultaneous process. You can't add on anything after the core idea is put down.
No, the criticism about Kurukshetra was it was too much of a form, and the substance was kind of put into it. But later it was found different because people were not able to understand it adequately. People thought that he had taken the framework of Wasteland and put Indian images into it. That was not so. So it was not. So it was supposed to be too crafty at one point, or Khasak in the Idihasam. Many people don't understand it. It's like if you read Virginia Woolf, everybody doesn't understand it. Salman Rushdie, when you.
But you can belong to the esoteric elite group of intellectuals when you say.
No, but that you have to cultivate.
I get.
I took Midnight's Children on a flight from London to India. And I know Midnight's Children must be some fancy novel, so I started reading. I couldn't go beyond 3 pages. So the audience also has to grow. And where the poet and the audience meet, that is where the enjoy comes and fulfillment for both.
Exactly.
Very
I
good.
think no point in writing if people don't understand you. What are you writing for?
The people do write like that. People do write like that. It's a challenge.
Well,
thank God you don't belong to that group.
Not at all. I don't want
Thank you, Nirada, for spending so much of your time
Thank you, sir. Thank you for
It's been a delightful experience. We talk very often, but we never talk so much. In a structural way, we have not talked so much. All the very best. Thank you. Look forward to that.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.